Okay, hello everyone. Today's class is on the 10th house. This is great because at this point we've actually done a class on the 6th house and the 2nd house. This is completing the water trine. What all the earth signs and houses share with each other is that they're all dealing in some way with the very physical, tangible, practical aspects of being here in the body. We know that the water polarities, the polarities to all of these houses, 4th, 12th, and 8th, really does not actually speak to anything tangible or physical. They're emotional, they're spiritual, they're sort of speaking to the nature of one's consciousness, what this journey is behind the scenes. But in essence, the earth signs, the earth houses say that all of this is being contained and embodied. And the interesting thing when we start really looking at the earth archetype is it's very transient, it's very impermanent. It's not a very absolute kind of reality. Thus, all of the earth signs carry this quality of transience, and thus it must have a purpose. Everything that is temporary must not have any kind of value or meaning on its own. There must not be any kind of blind materialism in the physical reality. If it's transient, then it's about what is it for? How do I use it? That's a general earth question. All right, 6th house, what do I have to work on? What's in front of me? 2nd house, how do I survive? And then 10th house is what are my responsibilities? And I want to start by unpacking the archetype of responsibility and how responsibility always resonates with a necessary reflection and attunement to time, space, form, function, parameters, definition. And that the notion of responsibility is always linked to the fact of us being here in a physical form, having a physical experience. If we weren't, then responsibilities wouldn't be relevant. Like responsibilities imply earth, like responsibilities literally imply a time-based structural reality. Responsibilities are relevant here because as a part of this evolutionary journey, manifesting within a particular time-space construct, there is thus this experience of, okay, there's a way to be here on this planet that works, that's functional, that's healthy, that allows for a state of alignment so that I can function in this world with consideration and respect to the fact that there are other people here doing this thing as well. So we create structure and boundaries that allow for things to work out. And these are not just things that we create consciously, like stop signs and red lights and things like that. That we have to learn how to be responsible with those things, follow the rules so that we can function. It's also being responsible relative to the parameters that we've come into that aren't in our conscious ego level choosing. So an example of that would be our body. Our body, again, it's not absolute, it's very impermanent, which means we do have to come back to that question, what is it for? How do I want to use it? We're dealing with a template, something that has parameters to it. We learn that we can't just eat anything that we want to eat. We can't just stay up all night and then go to school the next day and, think that we'll function well. There's a lesson in being in a physical body that teaches us there must be a wise way to work. There must be a way to work with my body with form of time and space that is functional. But the importance of really reflecting upon what is it for? Why am I becoming responsible is so necessary, because what can happen in the 10th house is we can develop a sense of responsibility in becoming attuned to the parameters and the limitations of our reality, right? Like I have to eat this way, or I have to make sure I get to sleep on time, and all these little things that we have to do. But without a deeper attunement to why, what is it for? What's the purpose of all this discipline and all this responsibility? Then we just become very conditioned by the structural realities of our life, by the body, by form, by time and space, by our family responsibilities, by our job, by the need to make money, all the things that are needed here. And thus we become enslaved and feel psychologically stuck and imprisoned by a structure outside of ourselves, by the man, by the boss, by the demands of time. And even more existentially, it's like God is holding me down in this cage and I can't be free because I have to do these things. It's my karmic responsibility to have to show up in these ways, etc. We often think about the 10th house and the Saturn Capricorn archetype more like the stern father figure. But of course, we know that Capricorn is a yin sign. And I never really hear people talk about Saturn, for those that use gendered languages for astrology, as a she. I don't usually use gender language. Sometimes I might, but it's not something that I think I usually work with. Like, I don't think I call Neptune she or her. I just say it usually. Maybe sometimes I do, but I was thinking about this earlier, that I pretty much always hear people talk about Saturn in terms of he. Oh, he's transiting through your second house right now, or, you know, that kind of thing, in the same way that you would often hear Mars referred to as a he. And I think that's very interesting. We know that in general, the Saturn 10th house archetype does have a very strong patriarchal association and construct to it, where this archetype itself speaks to all the rules, the social constructs that say, here's the right way to live here. So if you're in a female form, this is how you're supposed to live, especially if you're in a particular society or culture or nation. Anything that's defined, so your nation, your country, your government, whatever, that's all 10th house Saturn stuff. And that defines the cultural rules or laws, or even legal rules that say, oh, in certain countries, according to your gender, there are rules you have to follow. And so then that will be experienced no differently than you might experience, you know, if you eat too much sugar, your belly aches. Or if you're a man and you hold another man's hand, or if you're a woman and you don't cover your face, you get punished. And these constructs, whether they're like things we notice about the natural structure of things in the moment, or they're totally self-imposed from society or from ourselves, what so often happens is they go unchecked. And so it becomes this conditioned idea where the mind actually builds like this little box. So it looks out and it sees the box in its mind. It's not actually seeing what's here, because really there's nothing outside of the mind. And so the Saturn 10th house process is unraveling how we've actually built a structure of limitation, of judgment, of punishment in our minds. And thus we see it out there. So coming back to the notion of what is it for is so necessary, because this whole spiritual journey, this life that we're in, and all the things that we do, the money that we make, the responsibilities that we show up for, none of it has inherent meaning on its own, but they're all serving as a template for us to become aligned, to bring agency and mastery into our experience of time and space. And that mastery essentially reflects a state of being where we are using the things of this world for cultivation, for good, for health, for well-being. Thus, we're training our minds to be healthy, to be aligned, to be clear. And what that really says spiritually is it frees us up from the materialism of time and space and form and responsibility and duty and obligation and guilt and shame and judgment. And it allows us to settle here and be free inside to live in the present moment, to live in relationship to what's essentially true and what is actually of greatest importance to us. We see this in elders, where maybe they've lived a long life, and if they're, you know, doing that work, there's oftentimes this restfulness that they carry, right? They're not concerned with, you know, needing to fulfill all these obligations. There's that archetype of the grandparent that just delights in playing with their grandchildren. There's like almost this natural life cycle where there's a freeing up of responsibility. But of course, a lot of this exists within the construct of you save money, then you retire, and then you're free from all the things that you have to do otherwise before then. And so while there is often this sense of peace, you know, and ease that we sometimes see in elders, we also have to appreciate there's this whole construct that we've created in this reality that assumes while you're alive and functioning and young, you have to be repressing and suppressing and suffering and be exhausted because there are things that you got to do. In more natural communities and in older times, we would find that the elder would kind of hold this space of wisdom and be able to provide counsel, provide guidance to those that are still learning the way. And the essence of guidance and learning, the teachings that can really come through wouldn't be, hopefully wouldn't be, well, you just got to do it, suck it up and do it. It would be about pointing people back down to what is your work to do? Because there's a very strong quality in the 10th house where we need to develop a wisdom and a self-reflection where we recognize, okay, this is where I have to learn alignment. And thus I need to develop a more conscious relationship that will take time to all the things of my life. If I have a job, I have to learn how to do that. And I have to know actually what I'm doing it for. And is this really aligning with my values, or am I just doing it to make money? And if I'm just doing it to make money, how will I get from where I am to where I want to be? That will take time. That will take self-knowledge. This is the mastery that comes with the 10th house. And it's an interesting situation because it takes time to develop that self-knowledge. We have to be very gentle, 4th house polarity with ourselves, and not repress our emotions. There's a quote from Jim Carrey, which is, depression is really deep rest. It's the body needing deep rest. We'll look at his chart in a moment, actually. And what it's really saying is, I don't like the person that I've been. I don't like the thing that you've made me to be, forcing me to be something that is not authentic to who I am. Telling myself, you got to fit into this box. You got to be this. You need deep rest. You need to relax. You need to replenish and feel and connect with what is needed here. What is your life path? And so this idea of responsibility, it's very real. It's very real, but we actually have to have a very working, conscious relationship to it so we know how to gauge it with mastery and purpose. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves a slave. And the other extreme of the 10th house could be just neglecting one's responsibilities. Now, this is a different kind of neglect than in the 6th house. 6th house could be the neglect of not dealing with things that require maintenance, right? Things to work on, things that require constant improvement and development. So if you don't deal with something that's kind of like falling apart, it'll create a crisis. The 10th house neglect is more of a immaturity and refusal to show up for one's life and what is necessary to do. And the issue here is it doesn't necessarily create a crisis. It can be more of a situation where the immature self, because the 10th house isn't just you're the adult that has work to do, it's also the child. At a certain point in the 10th house, we are children. And we need the world, parents, guidance, authority figures to be able to hold our hand and teach us the way. And if we don't mature, then we will just hold this sense of, well, I need the outer world to do it for me. Or I'm not going to develop this kind of responsibility because I'm not used to taking this level of self-responsibility and self-authority. It's going to get itself done. Because that's what it was like when you can poop in your pants and you'll be taken care of. But you can't carry that habit, or you shouldn't carry that habit, in my opinion, into adulthood, right? That's not functional. And so what happens when we're not cultivating discipline and attunement to our responsibilities and showing up for it, it just means we can't live here. It just means we get nowhere. We don't accomplish anything. And so there can be a way of living where that's just fine, right? Relative to your potential, you might be over here, but nowhere near what you could be if you were applying yourself. And that can feel scary and daunting. That impulse towards irresponsibility can feel so daunting because it actually brings up all of the conditioning around, if you don't do this, you're going to be punished. Or if you don't do it right, you're going to be punished. And there's all that judgment and shame in the 10th house. Like, you need to get an A+ in your tests. I'm sure a lot of us have had that experience as children, being pressured to, succeed. But it's like empty success. And so we have to know how to succeed. We have to know how to work hard and do our work in the world, but not for an empty value, not for an empty purpose. which is why we really can define success relative to the 10th house as doing work that is personally meaningful and socially relevant, meaning we are showing up in a sense of authenticity and alignment with ourselves, doing the right thing according to an inner standard, and simultaneously cultivating and committing ourselves to do it, to become masterful at it, knowing that in so doing, we are participating in a social need. It's where our own joy, and 10th house, Capricorn, Saturn, is joy. It's joy that we earn. It's where our joy in showing up and not struggling with life meets the social needs of the time. This can be as simple as the joy of parenting your child, of providing for your family, doing a hard days of work, and being able to give your complete attention to your family. It can be the joy of, being a school teacher and planning your work, knowing this is my responsibility, this is my work, and then showing up and teaching your class, and then you can go home and let it go. There's a restfulness in doing your work and moving on. And Jeffrey Wolf Green often said, you can apply this to many archetypes, but relative to the 10th house, there's a sense of peace and joy in this quote. What's the way to happiness? To earnestly know, and this is not a direct quote, but basically what he said, to earnestly desire to know what God wants you to do and to do it. And from the 10th house point of view, it's like, okay, whatever it takes, I'm just a young person. I'm a novice. I am a disciple. And if I'm willing to let myself be humble about that and not get there yet, not be a master yet, not already have it figured out, then I will grow in time and really be able to do my work in the world and feel that satisfaction of doing the right thing, which is according to an inner knowing of right. That sense of right is not outside. Our responsibilities and work in the world are how we are karmically positioned to be working with time space in the unraveling of time and space. The point of gaining mastery and purposefulness within form, within time, is actually so that we're not defined by it. Right? We don't get from, the extreme of lots of time and social and, pressure and form to being free of it without learning how to actually use it. It's not going to go away, right? The bills aren't going to pay itself. If we just spiritualize, your family still needs to feed, right? So the challenge really could be actually the seeming dissonance between one's spiritual essence and then like the needs of the world. But the key is to bring them together. That's really important. Any planet in the 10th house runs that potential of becoming a point of stress and effort. But the key is to really understand this is about mastery so that I'm not always struggling in form and in time. Now, some of the issues that naturally arise within the 10th house archetype, and we'll start looking at houses and particular examples to flesh this out, would be one of always struggling, like never on time or never quite getting there. It's like we're the physical reality. There's never enough time or space. So you can just like check that out with yourself, right? Like, is there enough time and space to do the things that you got to do? Gemini in the 10th house. Are you organizing your thought and your responsibilities as a writer, as a researcher, as an educator? And are you working too hard and then creating stress in your mind? And then at Sag in the 4th polarity would be, you just got to get out in nature and just like let your emotions go. Aries in the 10th house. Are you always rushing to get things done right now? And then you break things. And then, you get into arguments with people and your bosses or your employees or employers, aren't where you want them to be, or you're always getting into accidents, or you never quite do it right because you're always insistent on rushing. And then you have to start over again. And then you're always rushing again because you didn't start off slowly enough. Taurus, I'm just going to pay whatever I want to and use my money however I want to and, feel a sense of opulence and ease. And then it gets to the point where there's no money left. It's like, oh, I didn't, manage my resources, Taurus in the 10th. So we'll look at all these examples. So that issue with not enough time and space, and that becomes a point of one, fear. Like, oh man, not enough time and space, which is where often we sell our soul to the devil. You know, it's often this point where out of the sheer apparent necessity to get things done, we'll just like, you know, get the job we hate, do the thing that we don't want to do. A lot of times we just settle for that. And there'll be some sense of alignment that will come from that. You know, basic needs are cared for. We're not struggling anymore. And thus that can actually be a very healthy step. What's even more healthy is if we can recognize that this step is just a part of the process. Like, okay, I need to actually give myself to a structural reality that maybe isn't my ideal, but it's necessary for now as I'm learning and giving myself the time to cultivate my path and create a stability in my life. But that's not going to happen overnight. So there's a lot of maturity actually often. And this isn't selling your soul to the devil. This would be consciously choosing to slow down and accept you can't get it what you want right now. Right? But you can take a step that supports the immediate needs, but do it consciously. Sometimes that's very healthy. I mentioned earlier how in the 10th house, there's that dynamic with a child that doesn't need to learn how to be responsible. And so there's an assumption contained in the 10th house, built into the nature of our human consciousness, really, that we will be guided, that we can trust something outside to help us. Karmically, we're going to resonate with external authority in our life, in our early upbringing, according to however it is necessary for us. Right? So whether we had parents that were neglectful or alcoholics or very rigid and judgmental, like all that ultimately is a very important piece for us in our own work. And so as we mature, it's like the issue with the 10th house is we have to eventually claim full responsibility for ourselves. But that can feel really difficult if there's a lot of unresolved childhood wounds. If there's a lot of guilt and shame and internalized judgment and pressure, a soul can live a life playing out two patterns in that way. And it can be a very fragile situation. One is interpreting the external world through the filter of the internalized judge that has been conditioned maybe in this lifetime, circumstantially from early life, you know, being yelled at by one's parents or being criticized for certain mistakes, having a very harsh rule and consequences for making mistakes. Thus, there can be a deep internalized sense of I'm wrong, I'm bad, but not really connected to that. Not actually doing, not having intimacy with like, oh, the tenderness of actually holding that within oneself. And so what can happen is there can be an intense sensitivity to criticism. Any kind of correction, any kind of criticism that comes from the outside world, and a tendency to perceive through the filter of if anyone is seen as judging, then it can actually lead to a lot of defensiveness and fear. And thus this can create either one, a soul that will become very internalized within themselves, very depressed, very withdrawn, or they'll externalize it and be a judge of everyone else. You know, look how they're living, look how they're acting, or look at what they're doing, or look how they're behaving, or all these social constructs of right and wrong that we've internalized. Like, I can't do this. I can't, Libra in the 10th house, I can't ask for what I need. So I'm going to be very polite to everyone. And then you can get resentful because other people are asking for what they need. Virgo in the 10th house. I have to work really hard all day, all night, and just sort of sacrifice myself for the job, for the responsibilities. And then like looking at other people that are sitting on their couch eating chips and be like, oh, they're so lazy and disgusting. And this is just an external projection of internalized judgments. And so that's the one extreme. And the other can be just manifesting a continual reality where one is being weighed down and pushed down. And this becomes very sort of like withdrawn and depressed and just almost like a defeatist mentality where it seems very true that life is just going to defeat you. Life is going to punish you. Life is going to force you and push you and be very mean to you and judge you. And so in that reality, in that internal mental reality, there's never going to be a feeling of being appreciated, of being told by that mother or father or principal or teacher, you did a great job. And there's a need in the 10th house in a healthy ego development to be able to feel like, okay, I'm doing good. Ultimately, that reference point for doing a good job has to come from within. But if the child never received that feedback, it can create a lot of distortion. And that needs therapy. That needs healing work. 10th house stuff often requires a safe therapeutic container to unravel the conditioning. And it has to be safe because it's conditioning. And so it's like, we don't know what we're conditioned by. When we know that we're conditioned by it, we're already not as conditioned by it. It's literally becoming aware of something that is not ourselves. So as we heal and as we grow with whatever's going on in the 10th house, we develop this discipline. It's like, okay, I have to work on my mind. And it's important to really understand that the work in the 10th house and Saturn and Capricorn in its essence isn't this external work. Like I have to discipline myself to become a better musician, a better teacher, a better parent, a better da-da-da-da. It's never about the external. It's always about our mind, our thoughts, the structure of our internal consciousness, which basically invites us to reflect on how am I using time? When I wake up, what am I doing with myself? What are my goals? The idea of goals resonates with the 10th house naturally because we're building something. If you want to build a house, then you will actually take the time to think. The foundations that I set up in the very beginning will assure that the structure that I'm creating is solid and will grow in time to a solid and safe house that I can depend upon, dependability. And we have to look at ourselves with what I'm doing with my time and my day. Is this reflecting my goals? Do I know what my goals are? Do I have that connection to what my purpose is? And when we speak about purpose in the 10th house, it's not like sun sign purpose or even 12th house purpose, which are different qualities actually. It's the work that I have to do. And when we know it, there's a feeling of, I am doing my work. We feel good about ourselves. It's like akin to collecting firewood for the community sweat lodge. And then you get together and you know that you did your job to contribute to the needs of the whole. That's what the 10th house is like for us. And you can feel satisfied. And you know, if you're a teenager and you're just learning how to be responsible for your life and for those around you, it's wonderful to be honored. It's wonderful to be respected and appreciated. And in the 10th house, we need mentors. We need mentors that know how to live here in a good way, that know how to work within time and space. And these can be our parents just as much as they can be an older sibling or someone at some point that is guiding us and helping us along the way in our learning. Showing us the way, showing us how to cultivate ourselves, how to discipline ourselves, how to go slow and step by step. If you're learning something, if you're training in something, the 10th house can be your mentor. It can be the master that you are a disciple under. And their role, their work in this would be to guide you step by step under the auspices of their own mastery because they've been there, they've built the house, they know how it goes. And so they can hold a space and a container for one's own discipleship. It's such a necessary part of the journey. And it's often missing in the society, but it's coming back as we're remembering. So at this point, what I'd like to do is look at some chart examples. Just flesh out how the 10th house manifests. And at any point, you are welcome to ask questions as I go along. Let's see here. Okay, PowerPoint. Okay. So Jim Carrey, I just wanted to read this quote for you. See, I thought I was building something people would like. I played that guy that was free from concern so that people would watch me and be free from concern. At a certain point, you say, okay, that's great. I don't want to hold up this avatar I created in the world. It's too much for me. It's not an exact quote, so that's more or less what he said. I was taking notes while I was listening to a video, so I think he shifted between third person and second person, or first person, or whatever those persons are. So let me go back to the current slide. Just look at what this chart is. He has Leo in the 10th house. That's an actor, right? A person whose work in the world is an actor. They are here to self-actualize publicly. And but Uranus right there in the midheaven. He says it's an avatar. Uranus is an avatar. Uranus is a metaphor. Uranus says this is all a metaphor for the nature of consciousness. And so we play these roles and we realize, actually, these are just projections of the mind. So in the 10th house, we have Uranus liberates from the social roles. I'm this important Leo actor that people like. Uranus, that's just an identity. I see that I'm not that. So there's this spiritual impulse on his own journey, and he's in a spiritual stage of evolution to liberate from identification with social importance and success. Meaning Uranus, he's liberating from the I am valuable because I'm getting positive feedback, 10th house, that I am a good actor. I make people laugh, Leo. That qualifies my sense of esteem. Bernie Sanders' birth time isn't entirely certain, so this is speculative. It's hearsay, but in my own correlations, and it's not 100% something I can vouch by, it feels more or less accurate just by transits and events that I've checked out. So let's take this as not necessarily true, but if, and this is, the thing with astrology, we can be wrong about everything and be totally off with our birth time. So it's a matter of, is it healing? Is it useful? Does it work for us? Is it, serving a purpose? So if his birth time is this, and he has Virgo in the 10th house, theoretically, we can see how this fits. Social servant, right? This is a very clear Virgo in the 10th house, sun, life's purpose to politics, social position, social office is the 10th house. And when he first got into politics, it was not because he wanted to, or he had this like egoic desire to be powerful. There was a need. And some people he was working with in this movement elected that he would be the right person to run for office. If maybe he was governor in Vermont or something like that. And so he's doing what he needs to do and taking it step by step. And that example of do your work and don't worry about completing it. Don't worry about getting positive feedback. Don't worry about people's judgments of you. Virgo in the 10th just says, I'm here to serve, and my responsibility is to show up and cultivate clarity in myself for what I'm showing up for and to do it every day. And of course, that Neptune piece is almost like that martyr, unconditional love, wanting to create a world that is in service to all beings and thinking about all of us and not necessarily about completing something. Virgo, Neptune in Virgo is about the moment. It's about doing the work and letting it go. It's a powerful spiritual lesson and expression for this soul in this lifetime. So powerful. Yogananda. What is he most known for? Autobiography of a Yogi. He wrote that book, Gemini in the 10th house. He also came to the West and he taught the science of yoga, Kriya Yoga. He opened up a school for that. So his work, again, Pluto and Neptune in this case, is to get to the core of his own internal soul authority and bring forth something that can be translatable and accessible to the masses. Neptune being the masses, Gemini translatable, 10th house, create a structural reality for it. We can have people with that same exact chart and they can just be drunk. There can be substance abuse, there can be alcoholics, because that same signature and a different expression, different karmic reality can easily show up. And we often see this. Either a person has parents, so your authority figures, 10th house, that were, either Pluto abusive, neglectful, not there, disempowering, shaming in a very intense, permeating way that would really lead to a sense of not feeling the power within oneself to access one's authority, or Neptune, not there, or checked out. or like some sort of delusional, spiritual, Judeo-Christian absolute morality. Right? You can have that with one's parent just as much as you can have a chart with someone who's exemplifying that. And there can be this deep feeling of not wanting to be in the world, feeling that this world is too dense, too hard, wanting to escape it. Neptune in the 10th oftentimes struggles with that reality of feeling that this world is too dense and it's easier to escape it. But in the same hand, these souls can bring forth a lot of light into the world. So I give this example because if you are aware, at this time of this video, I should have done a bi-wheel, but take it for granted. In October of 2020, the transiting nodes are in Sagittarius Gemini. And so right now, the transiting south node is in my 10th house. I'm sorry, the transiting north node, rather, is in my 10th house. So yeah, I'm moving towards a nodal return. The transiting north node has just been moving over my Vesta. And so what am I doing? A lot of my energy right now is focused on creating a structural reality for myself so I can focus on creating a curriculum, a course, a complete training program to share the teachings that I've trained in. Gemini in the 10th house, to disseminate information, knowledge, to instruct people in my path with astrology. And that's a Gemini in the 10th. I've trained in that sacred Vesta lineage, that sacred flame. I've trained in the evolutionary astrology lineage. I've been teaching and practicing for many years. Now my calling is to show up, step up, and fully create a container within time and space to instruct others. And then that's, of course, opposite my Sag in the 4th, which is family and spontaneity. And so, of course, and my Mercury is also in Sag in the 4th. So that says a lot about what I'm working with and how I'm kind of accessing that 10th house reality, how I'm learning to create structure and form. But that Vesta in Gemini in the 10th house, as I'm discovering it, and it's sort of obvious to me because I've been doing this for many years, but it's like you mature in your 10th house. You really do mature and you really grow into it. And I'm starting to understand, oh, this is actually about me owning and taking myself seriously, but not in such a serious way, but valuing my own mastery, valuing my embodied wisdom. And when we understand that we have a role to play, that we've been working, there's like this threshold in our own growth where if you're not aligned and consciously defining every element of your life in respect to what you're here to do, then there isn't a clear container. And then you really can't show up fully. And then you stay and struggle a little bit. So in the 10th house journey for all of us, as we deepen in our path, in our work, and our responsibilities in life, it requires even more attunement and attention to how we're choosing to work with all the elements of our life, really so that it can be functional and we can rest in alignment and clarity. So that's a really joyful learning for me right now, an important learning. Tina Turner, another example, she's Taurus in the 10th house and also Uranus. And this is very much a soul that says, I'm going to live my own life and define my own value, self-esteem, and actualize my own authority in the world, independent of someone else. Taurus in the 10th house. She left Ike Turner, that abusive relationship. And there's this quote that I read from her about when she saw her current husband the second time. She said, "Erwin," I whispered, "when you come to America, I want you to make love to me." That is the confidence of Taurus in the 10th house. I know my sexuality. I know my values. I know what I want. I know who I am. And I've built my career. I built my life. I feel rested in who I am. And of course, it's ruled by Venus in Sag, which is very honest, very direct. Aleister Crowley. This was a soul who was, I would consider, not in the light and was identified with a lot of, a big part of his consciousness, in my perception, was oriented towards power through manipulation, power through control. And so, Aries in the 10th house, and there's a quote that says, "Let do what thy will be the whole of the law." Do what thy will be the whole of the law, right? An underlying narcissism that says, I will do what I want. And then that Taurus in the 10th house is a self-entitlement. I'm entitled to have what I want. And he very consciously explored things with the body, with senses, with things that we would consider disgusting or sacrilegious as a part of his deep need to affirm his own agency and control over God. And so that Neptune and Taurus in the 10th, in this case, for this particular soul, I would suggest reflects a consciousness that says, I don't want to surrender to love, to the actual source of all things. I want to be that. I want to claim that and make it my own. So there's this other quote, love is a law, love under will. And you can see that distortion very much reflected here in that chart. And to be clear, the chart won't imply the distortion, a person's consciousness does, but then you look at the chart and you see what that says about it. Yogi Bhajan. This is Sag in the 10th house. He traveled. This is a good contrast to that of Yogi Bhajan, okay? He traveled to a different country and he set up a whole spiritual structure, right? Where people are following the teachings of, Kundalini yoga. Sag, but, Sag in the 10th house is disciplined within a particular spiritual lineage. And people that follow that practice would say, oh yeah, he's very much, you wake up in the morning and do your thing, do it. Very harsh. But we can also see the issue with Sag in the 10th house, with Saturn there, is a lot of belief systems and constructs that are actually very alienating and dismissive and take people away from their own direct experience of the truth. So there can be a dogmatism potentially in that signature, or a dishonesty. Am I living the teachings that I am teaching? Am I really being honest with myself? Right? And this thing wasn't about writing books. It was instruction on spiritual practice. And I feel he's made an amazing contribution, and I deeply respect and appreciate that. And of course, there's been a lot of stuff around him with sexuality, and you can see that, right? He has South nodes in Scorpio in the 9th house, ruled by Pluto conjunct Venus. There's a lot of stuff there around dishonesty and misuse of sexual energy. And while we're on that topic, Donald Trump. I once gave a talk a few years ago on Donald Trump, and I actually spoke at length about this Uranus in the 10th house. But I'll say this is an example of a soul that will, president, 10th house, CEO, 10th house, being the boss, 10th house. Those are all 10th house things where you're, rising to the top. But here it's happening on a total facade. The duplicity and the lying his way to become successful. The Gemini in the 10th is just this appearance of success, wearing and doing and saying the things that will get him further in life, but there's no substance in there. And that Uranus here in this case can actually represent a total disregard to following the rule or the law or any concern for how my actions affect other people. It's like Uranus in the 10th can be liberation from the ideas of rules and laws and freeing oneself from that limiting construct, which is why a lot of people with Uranus in the 10th are astrologers, because they're objectifying time and space. They're looking at it as an observer, and thus there's a certain quality of liberation that comes in that. But Uranus in the 10th can also be freedom from ethics, freedom from being concerned with how what I do affects those around me. So it's a distorted sense of freedom that actually creates more elitism and separation and trauma for others. And yes, this is all my opinion. Last time I spoke about Donald Trump, I got a lot of feedback, but that's okay. Everything in astrology that you say is going to actually come through your interpretation. The natal chart doesn't say if a soul is spiritually evolved or not. It's not going to say if a person's working with dark energies or not. We'll have to discern that on our own. Pope Francis, another Uranus, in this case, Uranus and Taurus in the 10th house. This is an interesting soul where he comes into a social position, 10th house. You'd think that the Pope wouldn't have a Uranus in the 10th house, but this is exactly exemplary of who he is. His consciousness is not actually as defined by the social constructs of the Uranus, the upper echelon of the Vatican, of the community, of the whole Pope world. His nature is actually creating a world that focuses a lot on value and resource and freedom and equality to all people. Now, he's not perfect in his own, understanding of what that means, but relative to the world that he stepped into, he is far more evolved and is thus bringing a force of liberation, freedom from the repression and the elitism and the separation and the Taurus, the misuse of sexual energy. Taurus in the 10th house and Aries in different ways can be misuse of the body or misuse of energy, misuse of desire or misuse of senses or commodification. Oh, okay. So that's a good time to stop my share. And now I'll just give a little bit of time for any questions.
What about Chiron in the 10th?
All right. Hi, Della.
Hey.
I've got Della's chart if you'd like it up, Della.
Sure.
Okay, give me a moment.
No problem. Thank you.
I'll speak generally at first while she gets it up. Here we're looking at, on the level of the vulnerability and tenderness that exists within the Chiron archetype, it could be an internalized sense or belief of oneself being not equipped enough, not capable enough of living and doing the right thing, feeling this internal sense of wrongness, and thus an internalized sense of shame and guilt. And the challenge with that Chiron in the 10th in general would be in not having a relationship to that. There can be this perpetual experience of coming into situations where one is doing work and they actually will have that experience of martyring or further wounding themselves through the work that they're doing, where it's going to be reflected back to them some element of wrongness, either some element of wrongness or some element of judgment, and thus repression and shame in that. In having a relationship to that vulnerability, which can be also a really deep permeating sense of, I can't trust my inner authority. I can't navigate the world according to my inner compass and guidance. And thus seeing the world as harsh or a place where, I can't quite fit into it. And it requires some sort of sacrifice that continually hurts me. Like being in relationship to that actually says, oh, I have self-doubt. I feel unworthy. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel strong enough. I don't feel adult enough. I don't feel capable enough. And in not being dishonest about that, the Chiron in the 10th house can actually show up to be a mentor, to be a guide, to actually hold other people's hands and create a life where there's safety and guidance for others in life. But it happens because they're in touch with their own vulnerability. And so there's a certain compassion and medicine that's offered through their relationship to their own tenderness and actually working with their own self-trust. And I think Chiron in the 10th house can really emerge as like this deeply self-respecting quality of knowing to trust oneself, but actually always being in touch with the tenderness of, it could even be like living in the world as it is and trusting oneself to navigate according to one's inner compass. So yeah, Chiron and Taurus in the 10th, so that archetypally would really speak at a core to a sense of self-value and self-esteem. Do I have what it takes to do my work in the world? If you're, is it Della Luna or Della?
Della.
Della. Are you open to me sharing a little, interp on this?
Sure.
Okay. So just to point out a basic piece. So Chiron and Taurus in the 10th house, it squares the nodal axis. And so the resolution node in this case is Aquarius in the 7th house. Oh, and Uranus is also, it's one of those, it's that year where you got that grand cross with the Aquarius, Leo, Uranus, Chiron thing, which is ruled by Uranus, which is then resolved through that North Node in the first. Let me just tune into this and offer perspective on this, particularly the 10th house Chiron. In part, there would be a calling, a movement on this soul journey to be, and your Venus ruling that Chiron is actually in the 11th house, and it trines that South Node in Aquarius. So this is a soul that can actually be a counselor or an astrologer, a guide for other people. And that Taurus Chiron there's a work here. I mean, so if we were going deeper, I would ask you, like, what's your work? What are you doing for people? Because this actually really much speaks to involvement in the world and interacting with people and helping them, Uranus, Aquarius in the 7th, liberate from projections and constructs of who they are by objectively seeing them and validating their unique reality. And thus in that validation, there's a healing that is being offered through that Chiron and Taurus in the 10th. It's like you're trusting yourself and your own medicine through doing your work and showing up in the world. That's like one in an isolated quality to it. Do you want to speak to any of this? I don't like speaking and just moving on in this context. Do you want to share anything, Della?
Yeah, a lot of things you touched on. Like, I do aspire to be a consulting astrologer. And I find that I'm always saying, like, oh, I need to study more and take another class and read another book. And you see I have that Mars balsamic to Pluto. So lots of researching and just so much preparing.
Yeah.
And then, like, in simple terms, I would say, like, I struggle with imposter syndrome, like putting myself out there. And then additionally, I would say with my family, like, they're religious, and so astrology would be on the outside of that. So, like, every time I bring it up, yeah, when I put myself out there, there is the potential for wounding that can happen.
Yeah, and that 10th house Uranus, it's like alienation from your own family. That's actually Uranus in the 4th. It's like you're an outsider. And then it's like, can I trust and value my own self when there's no, that's a good example of that Chiron wound. It's like, there are no role models, no one supporting me. There's no reference for me to do this. So I have to actually really trust myself.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anyone else?
Ari, in Della's chart, she has 2 stars of David. With Mercury, Moon, and Uranus, and Venus, South Node, and Pluto. And they all tie into the, the 10th, Uranus and the nodes. I don't know, any comment on Star of David?
Are you saying we have a steady stream of sextiles?
Yes.
Like a lot of sextiles?
She's actually got 2, she's got a Star of David. She's got,
like 2 trines.
yes,
Is that what you're saying?
on top of each other. It's amazing.
So the first is the water trine, the air trine. I see that, the air trine. What's the second trine?
Second one is Mercury,
Fire.
water. Mercury, Moon, and Uranus.
That's not a Star of David, though. That would be a Star of David if it was a fire trine.
Only if it was fire.
Yeah, it would have to be an air trine and then a fire trine, because that basically creates basically a Star of David is 6 sextiles all in row.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's still, it's close, isn't it?
Yeah, I can, but that just since you pointed to that grand trine with all that air is, of course, okay, a lot of study, a lot of learning, a lot of also objective knowledge and a capacity. So there's no shortage of that skillfulness here. That's what that would definitely say.
Okay, thank you. And Rochelle has a comment to make. Go ahead. Unmute.
Good morning. Yes, sorry. Hello. Look, I just stumbled across this morning, and it's really stirred something in me. I felt like you were speaking a lot to me. I've got Sun, Mercury, and Venus in the 10th house. Could you just, I don't know.
What sign?
Pisces, sorry, Pisces.
Will you share your chart and will you share your chart with us? Do we have that right here?
I think Linda has it. It's been a while.
I've got it. I'm just trying to get it. Just a sec.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us what do you do right now?
Wow. I feel like I'm forever waiting to step up and do what it is that I should be doing. I'm a teacher's aide, which I've just recently done in the last 12 months. I seem to change my profession a lot throughout the years. I do a little bit of women's healing work, which I would really love to step into and do more of that. Yeah. But at the moment, I'm doing, teacher's aide with kids.
Okay. So I'll offer 2 points here.
Yep.
One, in general, Pisces in the 10th house, and I spoke a little bit about this with Neptune in the 10th. There can be a perpetual ambiguity. We see this all the time with Pisces in the 10th. It's like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? What's my responsibility to do? And the challenge in that is that it's not going to come from something outside. It's like the world isn't going to be like, here, this is your holy task and your holy work. and now your life has meaning. Part of the journey with Pisces in the 10th house is that co-creative relationship. And so there is actually no inherent meaning in the thing that we're doing. Like, it's sort of empty on its own. What's really important is the love, is the ultimate purpose behind the thing that we're doing and the way that we're showing up. So oftentimes Pisces in the 10th house can actually look in a way where soul is doing work that gives themselves to the masses indiscriminately, being in service to anyone from any walk of life, serving. And oftentimes it can be like, you know, setting up a school or a structure or an orphanage or something where it's like anyone that has need can have safety and guidance and instruction and support. It could also be someone that is just doing spiritual work and being available to be in service and creating a container within time and space, even though it feels like, well, I don't want to have to fill in the blank, you know, get a website or build my business or advertise, because those things aren't important. But sometimes there's a lesson in Pisces in the 10th to actually come into the world a little bit, not in a way where we're leaving our spirit, but in a way where we're choosing to use the world as spirit. And that sometimes we have to be able to say, this requires effort. Oftentimes Pisces can reflect an atrophy where we're not developing ourselves. And thus we're sort of just like waiting for the eagle on wings to take us, or we can feel like left behind by life because we don't really know what we're doing. And so there's this lesson in building our immunity. Maurice Fernandez loves to talk about this element. Like, Pisces is actually the immune system. So there's a lesson in building our immunity. In this case, building a clear and stronger relationship to time and healing wherever there might be a construct of, I can't take this control, I can't command my own authority. You know, that's just one piece to say. And I won't go deeply into your chart. It doesn't have that same like as like Chiron in the 10th square in the nose, but we can see Neptune here is ruling your Pisces. So that says a lot about this service. It's with your moon and Sag in the 8th house. So a lot of the work around, you know, being a soul guide and any kind of empowerment work. Of course, the moon is with Neptune. So moon is women. This is nature. This is natural. This is soul work. This is intuitive work. This would mean you're a natural teacher, that you can guide other people. But also take note, you have Aquarius on the midheaven, ruled by Uranus in the 7th. So that actually qualifies the nature of your 10th house in general. So that's something to think about too.
Okay.
Anything you want to share before I close, since I just spoke about you?
Oh, no, thank you. It sums me up a lot. I've certainly had a life of service in all my career paths. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just, you know, I'm not like, nothing I said was to imply characteristics. I'm just speaking archetypally and generally for Pisces in the 10th.
Yes.
Okay. I want to share one more piece that occurred to me and then we'll bring it to a close unless there are other questions. Actually, this is something that I've appreciated that Maurice has spoken about, where he actually calls the 12th house a house of career. And oftentimes people will say the 10th house is your career. It often is. Like, I don't have the perspective that 10th house is not your career, because it does very much resonate with that, but not only that. Like, it's not just career. And I want to take the word career away, which is why I haven't really said that word. Career is a specific expression. Career literally means it's like the thing you're doing long term. Not everyone's life path is about career. Not everyone's responsibilities in life, where they're learning mastery and alignment, is about career. Further, like Gemini in the 10th, I am, you know, sharing information and knowledge, and that's a part of my work in the world. And thus you could say my career is astrologer, but it's also not what it is. Like, to actually look at the 10th house, we want to get away from constructs that put it into a box and get clear about what are you cultivating? What are the responsibilities that you're developing? Where are you cultivating alignment and mastery? Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll end it here. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in today's class.
Thank you, Ari. Could you all please unmute and thank Ari Moshe Wolfe, everyone?
Thank you, Ari.
Very much.
Larry.